On Saturday, the Metropolitan Police arrested over 500 people in London's Trafalgar Square. The reason? They were peacefully holding up signs bearing the message, "I oppose genocide, I support Palestine action." That's a message that remains illegal to publicly utter or display in the United Kingdom following the prescription of the group under counter-terror law by former Home Secretary Yvette Cooper last year. Now, that prescription was, of course, ruled unlawful in the High Court in February, though the ban is still in place while the government pursues an appeal. But there's no doubt that the arrest under the Terrorism Act of pensioners, vicars, NHS workers and ordinary people from every walk of life, now numbering over 3,000 in total, for a simple speech act has shocked many Britons to their core. And it turns out it's shocked some Americans too. Journalist and former Fox News presenter Tucker Carlson appeared on the Laura Kuenssberg show on Sunday. Kuenssberg is away, so Victoria Derbyshire conducted the interview instead. The topic was US President Donald Trump's war on Iran, and Derbyshire had a question about British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's role.
I want to ask you about the British Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, was criticised by the US President. He said, "This is not Winston Churchill we're dealing with." Do you think Keir Starmer has made the right calls in this war?
I don't think Keir Starmer makes any calls about anything. I mean, Keir Starmer's not.
Well, he did make a call about this.
Obviously. Right. Okay. No, Keir Starmer is every bit as enslaved as Donald Trump is. It is illegal. It is a crime for which you can be arrested in Britain right now, criticizing Israel. If you say you're for Palestine action, you can be arrested. A lot of people have been arrested. So in other words, it is not legal in Britain to criticize another country.
That is not true. And in terms of this war, I'm specifically asking...
I'm sorry, what is not true about that? Have people not been arrested in Britain for criticizing Israel? They certainly have been. There's videotape of it.
If I may, Palestine Action is a proscribed group. It is banned. Therefore, people have been arrested.
Why is it banned?
That is correct.
Why is it banned?
I'm asking you a question specifically about Keir Starmer and the decisions
because the Israeli government wanted it banned. I often criticize Britain, but I love Britain. As I said, I have family there. And I don't think that Britons understand just how badly they've been shafted by the United States. And I am ashamed of that, and I hope that we will do everything we can to rectify it. I hope that our next president strikes a far more conciliatory and cooperative tone with Britain and tries to help Britain, because it has a lot of problems that will be very obvious by the next time there's a presidential election in my country.
So, obviously she is technically correct that it's not the criticism of Israel that people get arrested for. The criticism of Israel, the opposition to the genocide, is just on the same sign as the ridiculously illegal phrase. But Carlson, at the end, is asking exactly the right question there. Why was Palestine action banned? Of course, that is not a question the BBC has ever bothered to ask, despite a High Court ruling against the ban, giving them every possible reason to ask it. There's also every reason to at least ask questions about influence from Israel or Israeli firms. It's long been reported by independent media organizations like Declassified UK that Labour held secret meetings with Israeli firm Elbit, the target of Palestine Action actions, months before the prescription of the group. Declassified has also reported on how Elbit Systems lobbied the government to order a retrial after criminal charges against Palestine Action's co-founders were dismissed. A retrial was subsequently then ordered. And even The Guardian has reported on government briefing notes that activists say prove the last Conservative government tried to influence the police over Palestine Action protests while reassuring Elbit Systems. It's not like evidence of potential interference doesn't exist. I'm not even saying it is evidence of actual interference. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's potential and it's been reported. And instead of pursuing that line, Derbyshire sort of gets into the technicalities of how ridiculous Carlson's claims are. She also then very quickly moved on to decidedly safer ground.
You have said that you have been called anti-Semitic because of your opposition to the US joining Israel in fighting this war.
Yes.
In March, senior Republican Senator Ted Cruz said anti-Semitism is being spread by loud voices, the most consequential of whom is Tucker Carlson. Republican Congressman Randy Fine called you the most dangerous anti-Semite in America. What do you say to that?
Of course I'm not an anti-Semite, and that's why they're calling me one. Because my position on Israel has nothing to do with the religion or ethnicity of Israelis. It has everything to do with decisions made by its government that hurt my country. And so in order to avoid having that debate, the fastest and most expedient way to end it is by calling the person trying to raise it a bigot. And I just don't think that works anymore. I would say that what matters in politics and in life is what you do. I think anti-Semitism and racism of all kinds, including anti-white racism, are all immoral and anti-Christian, and I oppose them. You shouldn't judge people on the basis of how they were born, period.
Carlson went on to talk about the changes he'd like to see in US political life, and that's where things got even more heated.
All American presidents since 1963 have done substantially what Israel wanted us to do, and now it's really hurting us.
Right.
And so the problem is not simply Trump. The problem is the mechanism of control that allows a country of 9 million to control a country of 350 million. What is that mechanism? I'm not sure I know the answer.
But
we need to find out what that is.
Well, as you know, as Commander-in-Chief, he could have said no to Benjamin Netanyahu. Other presidents have. Joe Biden, Barack Obama.
You're absolutely right. And I made that point. And you're absolutely right, they did. And I wish our president had. But he didn't.
So it's not the system.
And he went into a war. Well, it is the system, because the last president financed the Gaza genocide. The president before him, same thing.
Now, you probably remember that last week there was a very bizarre, last-minute, unannounced press conference by Melania Trump. Carlson was asked about what he thought that press conference was all about.
I wanted to ask you about the Melania Trump press conference, very unusual, where she denied connections to Jeffrey Epstein and said that any claims linking her and him need to end today. What do you think is going on there?
Strictly speaking, I don't know what's going on there. I know the White House communication staff had no idea she was going to say that. So it's one of two possibilities. Either she was reading speculation about her relationship with Epstein on the internet and she was upset and wanted to clear her name, which is totally possible. Or there was something else going on. So the Israeli government has a long and well-documented track record of using sex scandal or the appearance of scandal to force American political leaders into doing its bidding. You hope it wasn't that. But I did notice that within an hour or two after that press conference, a piece came out, I think, in the Daily Beast, alleging some connection between Melania Trump and Epstein, which was obviously hurtful to her and embarrassing to the first family. So I don't know if there's any kind of connection, but I do know, once again, this is a fact, that sex scandals are used, probably not just by the Israeli government, probably lots of foreign governments. It's not just the Israelis. I just want to be clear.
I mean, I am going to point out, I probably don't need to because our audience can see and hear for themselves. Pretty much everything that you've said in our conversation, Tucker Carlson, you have put at the door of the Israeli government. Now, to some people, that will be evidence that you are anti-Semitic. You are anti-Jewish.
Oh, I know. I'm very anti-Semitic and anti-Jewish. Well, first of all, the state of Israel does not speak for all Jews at all, despite its claims. It does not. There are many, many Jews, many of whom I know, who don't think the Israeli government of Benjamin Netanyahu speaks for them.
No.
I'm speaking of the government, not religion.
Hold on. Because I wasn't suggesting that.
Of course you were suggesting
what
that.
I was suggesting was that a lot of the
I've been in
things
this
that you have
business
discussed
longer
today,
than you, and I understand what a slur looks like. And you're attempting to call me an anti-Semite in a passive-aggressive way. Some people would say that. Well, I'm responding to your slur and saying that it's untrue. It does not apply to me. Doubtless there are anti-Semites who don't like Israel. I'm not an anti-Semite. I don't hate Israel. The Israeli government, this is documented, and I saw it personally, steered the United States into a war that hurts the United States and the world. I'm offended by that. I didn't want it, and I'm mad about it now. I have every right to feel that way. That does not make me an anti-Semite, despite your insinuation. And I think it's important that I say that. And by the way, I hope that you run this. I can't control whether or not you air this exchange. I hope that you will, because I think it's important to push back against slurs like that, because they limit our ability to understand what's actually happening. This is not an attack by Jews on the United States. This is Benjamin Netanyahu moving the United States to do something he thinks will benefit him, but that does not benefit us. It's that simple.
Barry, I found this sort of like a really complicated interview. You know, I'm someone, you know, not everybody agrees with me, even amongst people I work with, but I'm someone who holds Tucker Carlson in deep suspicion. You know, he campaigned for Trump. While he was close to Trump, he supported him endlessly. At some point, he stopped. And, you know, my own view is that, you know, he's really aware of like the MAGA base, and he's trying to shore up either himself or somebody else to sort of take that on. But what did you think of the conversation with Derbyshire there about the idea of Israeli interference in the American government, or in some of our own practices, like, for example, you know, as I put in the piece, of you know, three reports on at least lobbying by Israeli officials or Israeli businesses in respect of like the law in the UK. What did you make of that back and forth between them?
I don't know whether Tucker Carlson is on a grift. I don't know what his ambition might be with this sort of almost change of heart he's had, but boy, he is an effective orator when it comes to this stuff. Whether it's Israel's genocide on Gaza, whether it's the US-Israeli war in Iran, he is out there making mincemeat of mainstream media. And I think, you know, that he's partly able to do that because he came up through the mainstream media, and it's excellent to watch, whatever his motivation may be. And I think that we just saw it again there. I actually have quite a lot of respect for Victoria Derbyshire. I think she's by far the best interviewer that BBC has. And I think that when she stands in for Laura Kuenssberg, you usually get a better show with the rigor of the interview applied more evenly to people across the left and the right. And initially, when I was watching that interview, I thought, well, I don't see what's so controversial about it. You know, she's asking him some tough questions. That's her job. You know, she's putting the anti-Semitism thing to him. That's her job. I don't think we played the clip, but there was a bit where she asked him about platforming Nick Fuentes on the show also, and said, you know, well, Nick Fuentes is an anti-Semite, to which Carlson said, yes, he is. And I disagree with him. What I found egregious was the fact that every time Carlson mentioned Israel as being culpable in some way. So yes, whether that was that Israel has at least influenced the UK government to prescribe Palestine action, which, as you pointed out, is well documented. And even if that is just the Israeli lobby, that's Israeli interference. That's Israeli influence. That's Israel pushing the government to do something. The Israeli lobby, at the very least, indicates that that's a fact. That's what that is. And then when he talked about, you know, Trump being influenced by Israel to go to war with Iran, again, that's incontrovertible fact. What Victoria Derbyshire said was, well, Biden didn't go into war, Obama didn't go into the Iran war. And, you know, Tucker said, sure, of course, they have some agency, right? You know, Trump could have chosen not to. But if Israel didn't want him to go to war with Iran, the US would not be at war with Iran right now. So I don't think Tucker Carlson was saying anything that wasn't factual and verifiable. But what I noticed about Victoria Derbyshire through the interview was, whenever Tucker Carlson pointed the finger at Israel, there was a palpable disdain on Victoria Derbyshire's face. Now, again, I respect her as an interviewer, but to me, it was very apparent. She would sigh. She would try to move on. She would say, okay, you know, there was just this disdain, which she seemed to be communicating that she did, in fact, think that he was an anti-Semite. And it looked to me like the entire interview, she was conflating criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism, that old chestnut. And I was convinced about when she brought it back at the end and said, in a kind of impatient way, you know, you've spent this entire interview accusing Israel of A, B, and C. So many people will say you're an anti-Semite. I agree with him. I think it was a slur. And I think that for a BBC interviewer who I actually do have respect for, she fell right back into what we've seen for the last 2.5 years, which is the BBC pushing the Israeli line, pushing the British government line, being unable to step back and think about these things in a different way. That's one of the things I find so compelling about him in these interviews, similarly to the one he did with The Economist editor a couple of weeks ago. He challenges the framing, and they almost don't know what to do with it. So I think Victoria Derbyshire did herself a disservice there, and I do think it was pretty outrageous to raise anti-Semitism 3 to 4 times.
What was crazy about it is that the interview was all about Iran, right? It moved on to Nick Fuentes at one point when Carlson countered the anti-Semitism point around his criticism of Israel, when she brought up Ted Cruz and his comments and whatever. But it was essentially an interview about geopolitics and about the war in Iran, in which Israel is the partner. Junior partner, senior partner, who knows, but is the partner. And of course, in that situation where, as Carlson points out constantly during that interview, America is now in a war, which is bad for America. And it's not unreasonable to ask a question about how it got into that situation and whether Israel was a part of the decision-making, bad or good, that got it into that situation. And I've referenced it a few times already on this show, but this New York Times piece about the build-up to the war, the decision-making behind it, there's one point where, Netanyahu comes in and gives his pitch about what he wants America to do. Trump says, thumbs up. And then they do an intelligence assessment, and the intelligence people come back the next day and they say something, or his general says something like, the thing about the Israelis is that they always overpromise and underdeliver, something like that. Now, like when I read that, I didn't think for a minute that was an anti-Semitic comment. I just thought that was like a military evaluation, a political strategic evaluation of Israel as a partner in these kinds of adventures. But when Carlson brings up the question of influence, which is in fact laid out there in a New York Times article, it's suddenly at that point anti-Semitic. I mean, I can see the stuff about, platforming people like Nick Fuentes. Like personally, I wouldn't do it. I don't really want to hear from him. But, he did do it, and he called him an anti-Semite, and Teddy disagreed with his views.
I think it's a fair question. It's a fair question to say, explain platforming Nick Fuentes. She asked it, he explained it. But the thing is, he wasn't talking about dark forces behind the scenes manipulating every aspect of US government policy. He was talking primarily about actual documented influence. Whether that was talking about the war in Iran or talking about what happened here, we have reporting, we have verifiable facts about the influence. Like I say, he wasn't talking about conspiracy theories. He was talking about actual things that have happened that we know happened. So for Victoria Derbish's response to that to be, well, many people are going to think you're anti-Semitic, is bizarre.
Yeah.
We're talking about verifiable facts.
Yeah. Another thing that, just to end on this, I found really striking is after that interview, Victoria Derbyshire goes back to the panel of, talking heads that she's got there for that day. And the question of Tucker Carlson on Palestine Action comes up, and Mary Beard, the Cambridge classicist who is one of the panelists, she says, oh, well, he did get really confused about Palestine Action, didn't he? And, so he doesn't know everything. And I was just thinking, well, he's not that confused, because he's asked this question, as I said in the piece, that is based on, is why did the UK ban it? Why did the UK ban it? Because Israel wanted it to. He asks this question, he makes this point, which is just not even considered by the people who are invited onto the BBC to talk about this interview. They're not, they don't engage with the interview. Like personally, I would never have an interview on this show where I then talk about the interview with somebody else and the person's not there to answer for themselves. It's very strange, but they did that on Kunzberg. But yeah, it's just, something sort of the level of education. I know she's a Cambridge classicist, and I don't want to single her out because no one on the panel brought this up, but the level of a certain kind of political education of the people who are brought on and allowed to speak on the BBC seems to me strikingly low, because they don't, I think the information they get is all through these kind of mainstream sources, and they haven't seen things like the declassified reporting or the reporting that we've done at Novara Media, or even, reporting that's been done in The Guardian in one
And so
case.
they think it's weird when he challenges framing.
Yeah, exactly.
They cannot understand that framing, that is the way that the media that they consume frames everything. When it's challenged, they find that weird. I know we're finishing, but what about when they went back to the panel? Alex Younger, I think was his name, the former chief of MI6, I thought was very frank when he said he agreed with Tucker Carlson. And then he said that Donald Trump was turning into a more traditional president in some ways. Erratic but traditional, in that he was getting involved in the Middle East, cozying up to Netanyahu and doing war, which I just thought was amazing from this former head of MI6, this real frank sort of moment that I guess told us what he thought of the Americans when he was heading up the British intelligence service. So really interesting.
Yeah.